covert ops, espionage, the Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
This camera?
Yes.
Episode 243 of the Team House.
Guys, it's Jack's first day.
Kate Rocklein is back in the studio. You were, I guess, our first in-person interview we did in the studio space, 3 years ago or something like that?
It was almost exactly 3 years ago, in July.
So, I mean, last time we walked through kind of like your personal story and then sort of your, the story that I wrote about Michael Frody, who's
Right.
your ex-husband. And we went through that whole story. For people who aren't aware, the article is on Yahoo News, or you can watch the interview we did last time and learn more about that. But you also, in addition of going through all of this in your own life, you also have this academic background with medical statistics, and you did your thesis paper on TBI, right?
I did my master's thesis on TBI, my clinical doctorate was on SF medics, and then my PhD was on soft suicide and resilience.
So yeah, this very unique situation of like you've lived it and also studied it, and which is like pretty intense.
Well, and Michael got his first big blast in Iraq in 2007 in the middle of my master's studying TBI in ground forces, and then he died by suicide after neurotrauma in the middle of my dissertation on suicide and special operations. So art has followed life, has followed art. It's kind of awful, but at the same time, there's really no way that I can wriggle out of handling this stuff, because I mean, it is my lane, right? And then you have this additional life experience, kind of street cred, that gives me at least kind of an inside view on what these injuries actually do to families and do to service members, right?
So let's, for like people who are kind of just joining us for the first time and jumping into the middle of this, let's talk about what a traumatic brain injury actually is particularly in the context of the military.
Okay.
Like how are soldiers afflicted with this injury? What does it do to them physiologically and psychologically?
Yeah. So currently, traumatic brain injury can be caused by like blunt head trauma. So you're in a car crash and you hit something, or you have like a contra coup injury. So we see that in CTE with professional athletes or lots of contact sports, but CTE is different from repetitive blast exposure. So repetitive blast exposure isn't actually always blast. It can be overpressure. So it can be from like high caliber weaponry, which I know this is not now, thank you. So RPGs, I am not an artillery or weapons person, so help me out here. But
artillery, recoilless rifles,
thank you.
Mortar systems, and explosive breaching.
Right. So we're seeing this kind of neurotrauma syndrome. We're seeing it in pilots. We're seeing it in special operators, snipers, because of the caliber of the weapon and how close their head is. We see it in RSOs, and this is really where the genesis of the latest work came from, is that mortarmen, right? So I'm coming from the special operations side in my research, and I wasn't really registering with me, but in late 2023, these articles from the New York Times, from Dave Phillips, started to come out about all these mortarmen. And because they have such sustained exposure and it's more easily measured than did you breach, how many rounds did you fire, they know exactly how much they fired off and how close they were. And
didn't he do a piece, there's an artillery unit in Syria, I think, and they came home and had like an ungodly number of suicides?
Yeah, like statistically impossible rates of suicide.
For it not to be correlated,
Right. I mean, it could be correlated with anything, but we're looking at it statistically, like the numbers almost, to me, would imply a little bit of causation, okay?
Yeah.
Because there's no other variable that was introduced before their deaths beside that, right? They didn't all become alcoholics. They didn't all become, they didn't all start to suck at life, which is sometimes the excuse that the DOD gives, right? They had sustained exposure, and then they had a constellation of symptoms that were pretty consistent. So clinically, like looking at this as a clinician scientist, what are these symptom patterns that they're showing? How are they similar to each other? And what exposures did they all have? So even when you look at Mike, and guys who have died, and I say guys, I know that there's women, but the gender, it hasn't hit me yet, right?
This is the broadcast.
This is the broadcast. Okay, thank you. So, well, when presenting to professional, not that you're not professional, but when I'm talking to scientists, they're like, why don't you mention women? Because there weren't any, right? At least when I was doing the research. So, when you're looking at these constellation of symptoms, they're so consistent because Michael, he had repetitive neurotrauma, repetitive blast exposure, and then he died after about 90 days of aberrant, really odd symptoms, right? Like paranoia, like we spoke about last time, like he completely forgot his tradecraft. He was all of that, right? And then reading about these mortarmen and these artillery guys, tankers too, they have almost the same exact symptom patterns as Michael did. Okay, so if we look at the symptom patterns and we reverse engineer to the exposure, right, we can basically backtrack. Whereas current efforts are to, let's measure all of this blast overpressure data with gauges. We don't know the right gauge, we don't have the right gauge, but because that's what's coming out in legislation, that the mandate from Congress is that these blast exposures have to be counted and measured and thresholds have to be established, that signals to
national safety standards, basically.
Right, but it also signals to the military industrial complex that this is where the money is. Okay, so if you want to develop a blast sensor, they're really important, they really are, but we should not be basing the clinical side on waiting for those measurements, right? Because garbage in, garbage out. So it was a little bit longer of an answer than you were probably anticipating, but.
Yeah, I mean, just to backtrack a little bit, like the nature of these blast injuries, right? Like what it does to the human brain.
Thank you.
As I understand it, the human body's made up mostly out of water. When that blast wave goes through them, there's like this expansion and contraction that creates micro lesions in the brain. Is that in the ballpark?
Kinda.
Okay.
In full disclosure, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm going to explain it in the layman's terms that I understand. So any kind of blast wave exposure, and there was really, really good talks on this a couple weeks ago at NATO in Toronto. So everybody came together to talk about blasts and really great science. So blast overpressure travels through your body, not in a nanosecond, but in a microsecond.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's immediate. And the easiest way for me to, kind of conceptualize it is that when it goes through, it's pressure, right? It's tiny, tiny, whatever pressure waves are made of, right? Let's talk to a physicist about this. But when it hits your cells, for one, it can deregulate your mitochondria and the way that your DNA signals to each other. So I think maybe you've heard the term like operator syndrome.
Yeah.
Okay. Not really a scientific syndrome, right? I understand that a bunch of clinicians saw these symptoms occurring in groups of special operators, and I agree that those symptoms are occurring, but the way that you develop and diagnose and have criteria for a syndrome is not how operator syndrome has been presented. I do think that those symptoms are real because I've seen it in my patients and I've seen it in guys that I know. But because the body is affected at a cellular level from these blast overpressure waves, not only does it scramble DNA and it deregulates your mitochondria, so then your cell, like the powerhouse of the cell, right? Your cell doesn't have energy, it doesn't process it the right way. So in my opinion, or at least my theory, is that the symptom patterns are too consistent across forces, across demographics within the military to be a fluke. Okay, so for me, that says that this is a molecular problem. And when we have molecular clinical problems, we can start working on precision medicine. So if we know what your DNA is doing, then we can figure out what are the best medications. Can we try investigational new drugs? Can we try psychedelics? Can we do a bunch of different things? So not only does it hit your brain, and what they found, and this is since I was here last, so at Harvard, the ReBlast study had 30, I think it was Navy SEALs, operators, living operators, right? They go to Boston, they get their brains scanned by this amazing machine. It's called a Tesla 7. And they found thickening in certain areas of the prefrontal cortex. And again, not a neuroscientist, I'm just regurgitating this from memory, right? But the areas that they found of kind of scarring and thickening and damage for one, your prefrontal cortex is where your resilience is housed. Okay, your emotional reactions, your ability to empathize, irritability, the way that you perceive reality is all here. All right, and there's a specific areas of damage to what they call the RACC within these bodies that are sustaining a lot of blast damage because it goes up through your orbits, right? It goes up through your eyes. So when you're hit, it hits your helmet, but it goes up here. And part of the problem is that y'all still strap your helmets. Okay, so in World War II, it was just like a soup can, right?
John Wayne in it.
Right, but you got the strap hanging, and when something would blow up, your helmet would get blown off. It wouldn't trap all of that in there, right? So that's part of the problem is
That's interesting. So the ballistic helmets are making it worse.
the foam appears to be. Don't quote me, right? Because that's not my lane, right? I'm touching into
That's
other people's
interesting.
lane. Yeah, so some of the protective equipment that you have is making it worse. C3 Mortarman, Todd Schrader, and his partner, Tim Grossman, have developed helmet accessories, which is my girl way of describing it. But it goes on the helmet rails, and it protects from the blast overpressure exposures, and that shows a lot of promise.
Interesting.
Yeah, but the pressure waves seem to go in through your eye sockets and then right up to there. And that's why it seems to be that, at least in my opinion or my estimation, that's where it shows promise. Like all of these weird behavioral issues, the suicidality, guys getting blown up and then becoming completely different people, right? Like I experienced. It's not PTSD.
It's frontal cortex damage.
It's actual brain damage.
Yeah.
And what we've been hearing for years and years and years is that, well, we don't have a diagnostic test. And we have no way to really know if this is blast overpressure or if it's this or if it's that. I mean, it's probably PTSD, whatever. Like until last year, SOCOM Command, in their statements to Congress or in their statements in general, they're still not saying TBI and suicide in the same sentence.
Why is that?
I don't want to speak for them because I know the current SOCOM commander from back when he was in 04 and 05. And he's...
Brian Fenton?
He's still a great guy. I mean, to my knowledge. He was always, in my opinion, concerned about his soldiers and still seems to be. But I think that, speaking a little extemporaneously, when you're able to diagnose something accurately, that creates counts, right? So when we get better cancer screening tools, we have a spike in cancer incidents because we're catching it better.
Right.
And when you finally develop a diagnostic tool and then you deploy it and you actually catch these injuries, then people have to pay for it. Then there have to be programs. Then there has to be some kind of treatment. And it's far more cost effective to just turf y'all out of service.
It makes people look bad because the line graph has gone up. And it's actually a good thing because, like you said, now we're catching it.
Yeah.
But at that moment, it looks like, oh, why do you have a 150% increase in X? What's wrong with you?
Well, and as it stands now, there's probably over 450,000 GWAT veterans with this kind of blast exposure TBI. And TBI is traumatic brain injury. It is trauma to your brain. And what we're realizing now is that areas of the brain control a lot more than we thought. It's not just we know that it controls a lot of different things, but these subtleties in really abnormal behavior and even some of the alcoholism and the substance abuse that these guys fall into who didn't have it before, after these blast exposures, the picture is starting to emerge, right? And because of all of this talk about, well, we don't have we have no way to diagnose this. And that's also the party line too, is we just don't know. We don't have enough data. How long was that war, Jack?
21 years.
21 years? Put a man on the moon in 9.
Yeah.
Pretty sure we could have gotten a handle on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you're dismissive like that, the question becomes like, okay, at what point in an undetermined future are we actually going to make it happen?
They're not.
Yeah.
That's the short answer. So it's going to be up to scientists who have some academic freedom and some, professional cover to say it.
So let's get a little bit into, deeper into the treatment and the diagnosis,
Sure.
and sort of like, I'm also interested in like the trajectory institutionally of like where the Army was in like 2004 or 5 or whatever to kind of like where it is today. Are they like making baby steps, getting where they need to be?
I have a report from the Congressional Research Service, amazing resource. And they have a whole table, a timeline from 2001, 2003, probably 04, 05 when we started to see these injuries emerging. And they have mapped out what the Department of Defense has done over the last 20 years.
And what is that?
If there was something in there, I would tell you. A lot of it's rebranding, right? Well, we're going to call this the Center of Excellence, and then we're going to do this. And there are some really great centers there. Like if you go to Walter Reed, it's like walking to a spaceship, right? Like it's Star Trek. It's beautiful. But then you go down to Camp Lejeune, and at Walter Reed, they have these walls of like movement and cognitive testing where you hit things on the wall and there's sensors. And then you go down to Lejeune, and it's a poster board on the wall, and like hit right, hit left. It's like playing Twister to assess your cognitive speed. And so not all centers are created equal. When we were on Capitol Hill last year, we happened to be having meetings with armed services legislators at the same time that the brain injury symposium was on the Hill. And they didn't know who we were, the three of us, and I'll get into that. I mean, of course, they knew who Frank was, Frank Larkin, right? But Jana and I were just these anonymous scientists that were traveling with him. And we went up to whatever foundation is in charge of brain health for the DOD, whatever contract. And we're like, okay, so what do you have at Fort Campbell? Oh, we have this great center at Fort Campbell or whatever, Fort Knox, whatever. It's a great brain health center. It's on this road and they have all this and they have all that. It was shut down a year ago. Or, or you can go to whatever, BAMC or whatever it was. Like, yeah, that hospital's closed too.
The similarities between this and the Havana syndrome, anonymous health incidents, whatever we're calling them now, is like so similar because the party line was like, oh, we're getting our people help, they're getting compensated, this and that. But then if you actually talk to the people who have been afflicted with this, they're like, no one's told me anything.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin the process of that.
Well, in preparation for the Hill, so the background on that is that, Frank Larkin, myself, Jana Masseri-Brooks, she's also a PhD military health scientist who studies TBI and suicide. And so in preparation for this, I'm like, okay, well, as a scientist, I have to look at all of the things, right? So pulled up GAO, DODIG, all of these different reports. And it's not a pretty picture as far as, what we've tried and what has worked. It's not much. But I need you to bring me around to what you last said because I lost the thread on that.
No, it's okay. We can go into the
Okay.
AHI stuff later.
Oh, but okay, on that note, a lot of the authors and people who worked on the AHI study for Havana syndrome are part of the DoD TBI apparatus. So if you go like down into the fine print and you look at who is helping, it's the same people who have been working on
the
TBI.
same neurologists.
The same staff, same kind of like same usual suspects that I see on articles and research and whatnot. And the Havana syndrome stuff, as you were telling me, the lack of informed consent, the lack of human safety protections for the study seems to be very similar to the DoD's Warfighter Brain Health Initiative and the longitudinal medical study on blast overpressure, where informed consent and human safety was either not disclosed or it wasn't done.
And the CIA has sent some people now to the TBI clinic at Walter Reed to be treated they're using some of the TBI treatment to treat Havana syndrome, which apparently they've had some success with.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. So it sounds like the military has struggled to wrap its head around this problem.
I think that's a polite way of putting it.
Yeah. And you mentioned, some of the legislation that was passed. I mean,
Right.
let's talk a little bit about that and why that was necessary.
It was necessary because nothing was happening. especially over like the last 10, I'd say a good 10, 12 years. So the background on that is, and this was kind of a Forrest Gump situation, but I was working for a defense contractor back in 2012, and I was approached to write an executive order. In a truly blonde moment, I said to my boss, I'm like, what's an executive order? Like Schoolhouse Rock had completely left my brain, right? So after he explained what the 3 branches of government were, I'm like, thanks, I feel really dumb now. He said, an executive order is needed on TBI and mental health in the military, and you're our person who knows about that. I'm like, okay. So I wrote it, right? And all of these things are ghostwritten. Like, you're never going to get credit for it. I know which parts of it I wrote, and it was most of it. And then I structured the national action plan for all of the executive agencies to get on board and treat TBI. This was back in 2012, 2013. So by the time that guy, and it was great, like, it was the Obama administration, for better or for worse, whatever you thought about them, they did have some serious commitments to service member health. And we were cooking with gas, right? Like, we got traction. It's 2013, 2014. This stuff is starting to go in. And then what happens in 2016? It's a whole new administration, right? So, the government is not going to continue costly programs just out of the goodness of their heart. If they don't have to, they won't. So a lot of that traction was lost. And then you see over the last, 8, 10 years, this devolution in neurological health and brain health care for service members. And so that's why we started to write the legislation, because there just was a vacuum. There's still a doctrinal vacuum as well. But also because we were seeing these articles coming out of the New York Times, we knew that motormen are such an excellent comparative population that if they're showing these signs, then we've been on the right track all along. Mm-hmm. And so it was time to make hay while the sun shone, right? So we wrote this huge bill. I mean, it was like soup to nuts. It covered almost everything. Like, it covered, it covered down to, making sure that you guys didn't lose special duty pay, like special operations, special duty pay, if you had to go to treatment for X amount of months. Like, we drilled super all the way down, like family care, spouse care, obviously like the medical care, the clinical care. And then, we handed over, I think it was like a 120-page document. And then it gets whittled down, it gets chopped down. And then like some pieces get sent off to other legislators so they can claim that they're doing whatever. And that's fine. I don't care who claims it, or as long as it gets done. The one thing that really did piss me off, and it pissed everyone off, is that originally the bill was named the Frody-Larkin Blast Overpressure Act, right? And right before it was, all the press releases went out, they took the names off. And in a meeting like that day, I said, why are the names off? Like, there's tons of legislation named after service members. And we were told that it was because legitimate Gold Star families would be upset that a bill was named after 2 special operators who died by suicide.
Also, no, they wouldn't.
No, they wouldn't.
No.
So I called Gold Star families, and I called the Wounded Warrior Project, because they sponsored it, like they supported it. And yeah, nobody thought that.
Yeah, of course.
Nobody thought that. That's politics, baby.
Yeah.
So.
What do you think the real reason was?
Because then it wouldn't be theirs, right?
Right, okay.
If it has somebody else's name on it, then politicians can't claim it as theirs. And there's really only one. Like, we know who the culprit is, but whatever. You know what? We'll take that knock and we'll keep on going.
So what did get into the legislation?
So what did get in is measuring, like creating a registry, right? So now it's almost like MedPros, right? You go to the range, you get blast exposure. That data has to go somewhere. For instance, like 2 or 3 years ago, the entire Central Command didn't really measure or capture or assess for TBI because the guidance was so unclear, right? So you have that kind of doctrinal confusion, or you have that kind of legislative confusion, or overlapping bills. That's why you need like a consolidated big bill. And I wasn't really aware of this at the time, but getting something into the NDAA apparently is like the policy Olympics.
Yeah.
News to me. Like, I was like, oh yeah, I'll write that. But it was the same with like an executive order. What's an executive order?
The right? NDAA, as I recall, is like, it's basically the congressional authorized funding for everything in DoD.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so we watched the whole session.
The sausage get made.
We like we had
Yeah.
it, had it on C-SPAN or whatever, and all three of us are kind of like on a text group, and we're like, oh my god, here it comes, and it got in. Like, so it's a start, right?
Yeah.
It's not the end of anything, but it's a start.
So I want to take a minute today to tell you guys about the Perfect Gene. I've been wearing them for a few weeks now and really enjoy them, and I just want to share it with our audience. Sometimes jeans have this problem where, you guys all have seen these skinny jeans that they like crush your balls and, it's just not comfortable to wear. Or the other way around, jeans are like too baggy. You have this sort of like diaper in your ass area, it looks like. So there are these problems that, different fits of different types of jeans have. And the Perfect Gene strives to fix that. Both the fit, but also the mobility, the maneuverability. It has a stretchy fabric. Like they say it's like yoga ready, but I would say it's athletics ready. Moving furniture, doing things around the house, you're not gonna have that like super tight, like constricted fit that you feel like you're not gonna be able to move around in. And there are over 400,000 people out there wearing these jeans at this point, so not all of them can be wrong. I hope you guys will go and check them out. So a few scenarios where you can wear these jeans and where they really come together. Everything from, doing yard work or doing things around your house. If you have to move furniture around or you have to do handiwork, they're perfectly comfortable. But you can wear them, getting your man spread on the subway, if that's your thing. So the Perfect Gene is great for all kinds of different environments, whether it's doing handiwork around the house or on the job or athletics. And we really hope you guys will go and check them out. For a limited time, our listeners get 15% off their first order plus free shipping at theperfectgene.nyc or Google The Perfect Gene and use the code HOUSE15 for 15% off. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectgene.nyc with promo code HOUSE15. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. So fuck your khakis and get the Perfect Gene. So it mandates that the military has to track this much more seriously.
They have to track it. Now, so like Angus King and other members of armed services have pieces of it, right? So they have created their own that kind of touch on the stuff that didn't get in initially. So there are more iterations coming. I would have loved to see more of advanced clinical care, more progressive medications, but it's a start. And that was a lesson that I had to learn. Like, this is not one and done. You can't just drop this on a legislator's desk and then say, okay, great, thanks, we fixed that, right? You have to go back, and you have to go back, and you have to establish relationships, and you can't stop, because then it'll just go nowhere. It'll just die. But what was interesting, especially as a scientist, translating research, like my research, Jana's research, other people's research into policy. First of all, scientists don't usually get to do that, right? Like, we publish an article and hope it goes somewhere. So that was immensely rewarding, because this is, and I'm not complaining, but this is not a fun subject to be a scientist in, right? Like, I publish rarely, but it's impactful. But because it takes years to do these studies, and they're difficult for the team, like they're difficult for scientists, especially like after Mike died, it took me 3 years to publish, I think, 4. Like, it's tough to wade into this subject when it personally affects you. But getting actual research into legislation is rare. Having evidence-based legislation is rare, because science and politics don't usually marry up very well. And it was, if you walked around, the Senate building or Russell or any of those buildings, there are long hallways, there's a lot of doorways, there's a lot of people to talk to. And every single conversation started with, hi, I'm Dr. Rocklein. I'm here to talk to so-and-so because my former husband committed suicide and he was special operations, and this is what's, like, it's just every single time you meet somebody, you're telling them, you're trauma dumping the entire time. But I think it also gives us some cachet, right? Where, tell me no. Tell me you're not going to support this. right? So I think maybe it was that nexus of having me and Frank, and Jana as well, because her husband has sustained blast injuries. But having people with skin in the game who also had the academic credentials to just look people in the eye and be like, yeah, I am the expert in this, and we're going to talk about this, and you're going to sign on.
So how is the military going to track blast overpressure now? Because I mean, we've talked about in the past, you know, there's problems with the blast overpressure gauges that you can put on a person that it does accurately measure blast overpressure, but not the effect that it has on the human brain.
So the problem with it, and I think one of the main issues is that we haven't used AI appropriately. Like, we haven't used machine learning models to figure this out, because there's a lot of intellectual or scholarly debate about where do we put these sensors? Do we put them on the chest? Do we put them on the head? Do we like? And I'm looking at presentations recently of, you know, like 60 sensors on poles with snipers like laying on the ground, and that's great. Like, that's basic bench science. We need that, right? We need that information. But it also feels like we're kind of whistling past the graveyard, right? Let's find a good sensor and go with it. And if it doesn't work great, let's try something different, right? This, you know, it's like a data fetish. Instead of the no data, no problem, now it's like, well, let's collect data.
Let's just make a library.
Let's collect so much data that we know exactly how much blast pressure is bad. Who cares, right? I mean, I care. People care, but is that really relevant, or can we walk and chew gum at the same time? Because we know that there's just historically there's a certain amount of, you know, kilopascals or PSIs that are dangerous for the human body. Mm-hmm. Current DoD guidance, I believe, starts at 4 PSI. That's about the approximate pressure of a bicycle tire exploding. So a real blast is probably going to be a lot bigger, I would assume. But hyper-focusing on the blast gauges is stealing resources, I think, in my opinion, from the clinical care. But it's also politically expedient to be like, well, no, we're doing tons of things. Look at all this, what we're doing on blast gauges. Look at what we're doing on overpressure data. Well, what are you doing on clinical care, right? What's the clinical medicine plan here? Because what the DoD is offering is not clinical medicine.
I mean, is there any clinical medical care as of now?
Yeah. There's amazing things. I mean, go to the VAs here in New York City, right? Go to home base and Harvard and Mass General. I mean, even UCLA has them, or not UCLA, UCSF, I can't remember which one. But out on the West Coast, like, we have amazing things going. Those programs are partnered with academic or civilian academia, right? And the DoD currently has outsourced most of its science. So when you're reading a study by the Department of Defense, it's usually done by a contractor. So it's probably the lowest bidder. I'm sure they have great scientists on staff, but they're not people like me or Jana or people who have spent 15 years in the trenches with no funding or limited funding, you know, really gutting it out. And when you've been entrenched in this kind of data and these clinical situations or problems for, it's almost 20 years now, right? Because I started studying this in 2006 or 7. So if you're contracting somebody from wherever, they don't have the same kind of skin in the game. They don't have the same kind of institutional knowledge. You know, Jana and I can, like, we're texting back and forth, like, we recommended that in 2009. We did that study in 2012. Like, we know the landscape, and so many other scientists like us know the landscape because we've been working on it for so long. But if you bring in hired guns, they don't, right? So, you know, I remember even the Army STARS study. Remember that big, huge study on Army suicide?
Yeah. Yes, I do remember
Yeah,
that.
and they concluded that special operations is like 2017, that y'all had no risk of suicide.
Or like statistically not above average. Yeah.
Yeah, and as they're like publishing that, SOCOM itself is putting out that suicides in SOF tripled. So you have a DoD-funded huge study, but they didn't understand that Special Forces like had its own MOSs, right? They didn't understand that different elements within special operations might have different exposures or might have different like mental health issues because of the nature of their warfare. And, these are big, huge, very well-funded studies, but the contextual disconnect is obvious, and we're seeing the same kind of thing. So long way around the barn, AHI, right? Whomever was contracted out to do that, have they ever been, not have they ever been operational, but have they been studying these kind of syndromes or these kind of weird exposures for years and years? Or is this a crew that they brought in? That's the question.
Like the NHI study.
NIH, yeah.
NIH study. The problem with Havana syndrome is that's something that's like, at least on paper, we believe it's like a novel weapon system that, is like, you're trying to deduce what that device is based on the injuries you're seeing without us having access to it. But even that's kind of what I'm saying there is kind of BS, because America does have microwave weapon systems. Like, it's not a total mystery. And we should have been much more proactive about that. But I can see how, like, clinically or scientifically, it's a little bit different than with TBIs, as we've been talking about. We know how these guys are getting those injuries. It's like very clear, and we can study that. But you're saying that there's, like, between the two subjects that, like, it's the same neurologists and same people who are bouncing back and forth between these two topics.
I don't know if it's the same, but I know that they were recognizable names. Again, though, when you've been reading this research for 15 or 20 years, I can almost recite reference lists of stuff that I've written, right? And so you actually sent me that study about Havana syndrome. And so looking at, who was on the study, and I'm looking in the appendices, and I'm looking up their CVs and stuff. A lot of them are the same.
I recall you being underwhelmed by the academic credentials of some of the people in the study.
Well, the study lead for Havana syndrome, no, it wasn't Havana syndrome, but yes, I was underwhelmed by the people leading Havana syndrome studies. First of all, because you need a clinical scientist. You need somebody with a PhD who also understands kind of the clinical side as well. But you need a study lead who's a really established, rigorous scientist, and that was not there. When we're looking at the longitudinal blast overpressure study that the DoD based their warfighter brain health program on, the research lead for that study has a master's in administration with no research preparation.
Yeah, with the NIH study on Havana, we should also point out that study has been shut down because of ethical concerns.
Yep.
There were all
Can I
sorts
try
of...
it?
Yeah, of course
Okay.
you can. There are all kinds of different problems with it. One of them is CIA personnel were told, you have to participate in this study in order to get treatment. It's the only way you can get treatment. Which
That's illegal.
Illegal as fuck. There's under Department of Labor laws, the government cannot direct care in that manner. They can't, like, coerce you into seeing certain doctors. Mm-hmm. If you need a knife, we have a bunch laying around here.
I'm sure you do, but I don't see a K-bar anywhere, so I'm just gonna girl boss this.
And what were some of the others issue was with private medical information being shared. So they were sharing their information with the doctors for this study. That information seemed like it was being turned right over to the CIA.
Of course it was, yeah.
Like, how is my boss at the CIA know all of my personal medical information?
But they wonder why guys in special operations won't go get
Right.
evaluated.
Yeah, exactly.
I think one of the quotes I read that I quoted in my dissertation years ago was, we're escorted like criminals for evaluation when we show any kind of mental health problems, right?
Yeah, nobody wants to be that guy. I mean, there's even, like, when you look at it, like, looking back on it, I mean, it's like there's even, like, some social shaming that goes on where they'd make a guy who's suicidal wear a road guard vest, and he'd have to be escorted around by two people at all times.
Are you fucking kidding me?
That was like an Army SOP. It may still be.
Oh, God. Like, you get blown up, and now we're going to make you wear a Scarlet A?
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
That's
Yeah, you're a leper. Don't talk to that guy.
a little
And that's what-
dehumanizing, you
And
think?
that's a term that the Havana syndrome people told me. They said we were treated like lepers.
Yeah. So much for insulate versus isolate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Geez, so This is such an incredibly complicated subject, and
You're driving.
it became, from speaking to you over the years, I've realized just how complicated it is.
It is.
It's way above my head. Are there any facets of this that, you'd like to bring people up to date on that we haven't discussed yet?
I do. So, for years and years and years, and so Frank was on CBS a couple of weeks ago. I think you watched it or you texted me or something about that. But whether I'm listening to Frank on CBS or listening to the DoD talk, I hear all the time, well, we don't have any way to capture this. We don't have any way to diagnose this. Like, we have ways that we can, diagnose somebody with exposures or with a, signs and symptoms of a traumatic brain injury. We have screening tools for that. They're not great, but we have them. Like the MACE-2, the ANAM, which is not combat normed, or SOF used to use impact, right? Mm-hmm. So different methods. But all of these symptom clusters that these guys are having seem to be just so elusive and nobody could capture them. And this has kind of been my constant gut check through the last, decade or working on this. I'm like, has nobody thought of this? Because my team, we created an evaluation tool for this syndrome of blast exposures. And we sent it out to, we didn't send it out. We handed it off for what we called face validity. So you create, say you go into the doctor and they give you a questionnaire about anything, depression, prostate problems, anything. You're going to be checking boxes on a survey, right? So that's an instrument. That's a clinical instrument. We use it to assess a lot of different things. Glasgow Coma Scale, almost anything that you experience clinically, we can assess it with an observational tool. And so I was like, well, let's create a tool based on all of these symptoms that they're telling us, and let's send it out for face validity, which is where I send it to you, who knows nothing about medicine. And I'm like, hey, if you could look at this and tell me, does this seem to be asking questions the right way? Do you understand the questions? Does it seem to be assessing blast exposure? And you come back to me and you say, yeah, okay. And then there's statistical ways that we can measure what we call instrument stability. So I give it to you, you're a former Green Beret and Army Ranger, I'm gonna go give it to a bunch of, SWIC boat crew guys. Is it going to remain stable between different populations? So just testing the instrument stability, because, you need a whole research study and panel and ethics, all that, not actually measuring symptoms, but seeing, does this instrument assess this kind of blast exposure syndrome that we're seeing? And, it came back to me, I did the statistics on it, and it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's stable. The reliability is high. So not reliability, but the diagnostic accuracy, right? So it's in 90%, 95% territory. So if we give it to 100 people, statistically, it looks like it's going to accurately capture everybody, but maybe 5%, which is pretty great, because right now we're at worse than a coin toss, right? And so a lot of these symptoms that come in, I'm having behavioral issues, my marriage is in the toilet, I'm drinking myself to death, whatever it is, those symptoms were in that scale, were in that instrument. And so from the statistical analysis, what emerged is that there's 3 main symptom types. So that are prevalent. So you can have all of the symptoms, right? You can have all of the things, but there's going to be what we predict or project. There's going to be 3 main archetypes. So one of them is seems to be focused on pain. There's all of you have a lot of musculoskeletal pain for sure. But this is intractable pain and, pain that's not explained. And then another domain seems to be more of the behavioral cognitive. And then another domain seems to be something else. So what that tells me is that if I give this to 1,000 patients and, a third of them show this kind of issues with pain control, I can prioritize that, right? I can send you right to pain management as I'm ordering the MRI and the this and the that, right? So we can start targeting your worst symptoms first based on this assessment scale. So it shows promise. And I think that kind of blows it out of the water. Like, oh, we just don't have any way to capture this. Yes, we do. Okay. If I can come up with it in a couple months, I'm pretty sure that somebody could have come up with it a couple years ago. So it shows promise. And there are not the Americans, but there are foreign militaries who are interested in it because, in this area of blast exposure and traumatic brain injury, the United States is doctrinally inferior, right? We do not have good clinical medical programs. We don't have consistent ones. We don't have what other countries are doing. And so in terms of this doctrinal vacuum, you saw that with CENTCOM, right? If you don't have doctrine, you've got nothing. So, yeah.
What countries are going to use this?
I can't tell you.
Why, it's classified?
I could tell you, Jack, but I'd have to kill you. No, I just don't have clearance to do it. I don't have authorization to mention it. But it's promising, right? So we have a lot of allies around the world who deploy with us, and they sustain exactly the same injuries, and they have exactly the same outcomes. And their governments are very concerned about doing it right. And so let's work with them, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And is there going to be a push on the next NDAA to get more language included and
Well,
whatever?
the next NDAA is going in June, so that ship sailed. And there's a change in administration. Politics aside, it's been a chaotic start to this administration. And when you're trying to get money to care for people who have not traditionally been a priority to care for, within that chaos is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I do, in my opinion, I believe that legislators and politicians right now are just trying to keep their head above water.
Right.
Well, I mean, you don't know where the next disaster's coming from, right? So even if we had like a really good line on getting more stuff into the NDAA, you would probably know better than I, because I haven't read the executive order, but, hidden within some of these a little out there executive orders are statements like mental health issues and suicidal ideation are not compatible with military service. That's coming from the head shed.
Yeah.
So to me that says, okay, we're going to injure you. And warfare is injurious, okay?
Right.
Warfare is going to fuck you up. Nobody goes into combat better usually than they came out.
Is there any follow-up to that statement? They said, what does that actually mean? Because, it sounds like we're going to break these people and tell them to fuck off.
I don't know.
Jesus.
I don't know. But I can imagine how demoralizing that was to hear for guys with RBE, with repetitive blast exposure.
It's interesting. As much as we all talk shit about Congress, it seems like it does take Congress getting involved to really move things, move the needle on this. And Havana syndrome as well. Like, no one was taking that shit seriously until Congress, made the intelligence community take it seriously.
Yeah. I'm a registered independent. I have no dog in this fight politically. People I thought would be really, really concerned and really gung-ho to support brain health for you guys, nope. Did not care at all. People that I never thought I could ever work with because they just seemed anyway, I'm just going to let discretion be to the better part of valor on that one. But people who politicians that I never thought would care, totally did. So
Is that because of ideological stuff? Or?
I think it's because the cameras are off, right?
Okay.
So you see a lot of the political theater, and then you meet the people behind it, and yeah, they are actually really good people. The leads on this bill were Joni Ernst, who,
Yep.
Oh my God, her staff is phenomenal.
She's very pro-military, pro-soldier.
Sure, yeah, but she's human and an amazing one at that, right? I don't agree with her ideologically. Sorry.
Yeah, but she's gotten a lot of opportunities to meet with the troops over the years.
But that's what I'm
and
saying,
knows them on a personal level.
Yeah, I mean, ideology doesn't matter because it's shared values,
Yeah.
right? She was amazing. Elizabeth Warren, who is on armed services, and you wouldn't really think like Elizabeth Warren would, but she's such a bulldog, right? Where, there are politicians who are trying to preserve their relationships with the DoD, and then there's politicians who can just carry the big stick, right? So you need the big stick and you need the diplomats. And it was, honestly, it restored a lot of my faith in humanity, especially dealing with Senator Ernst's staff, because from her military liaisons down, like her entire team that we were working with were all either recently active duty retired or active duty defense fellows. And they knew what they were talking about and they worked their asses off. So 100% like of love to Joni Ernst and her crew. But also, I mean, there are some people on armed services who just, I don't think they voted against it. But if something is affecting at least 30 to 40% of your armed services from the global war on terror, then perhaps you should take it seriously.
Well, I mean,
because it's your job, right?
The instead of attributing malice to it, I mean, there is quite a bit of like Grandpa Simpson type.
Was I attributing malice?
That serve in Congress. I mean, you've seen when they especially it comes out when
Like
they
shouting
have
at
to,
the cloud?
when they have
Yeah.
when they have to talk about technology or like they're interviewing
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg. Like it becomes very clear that these people are not living on the same planet as we are.
Well, there was one politician who kept saying, can we measure this like a Dexcom, right? Like diabetes. And I'm listening to this. I'm like, this is not diabetes. What are they talking about? And then I realized he was right. Is because there are, and it wasn't even registering with me. And this guy's not a scientist, but I am. So I felt kind of dumb. But there are actual biomarkers that emerge from blast injuries. And so, yeah, that is a possible technological solution. The issue is, does the Department of Defense have the political will to do the right thing with that data? Or are we still going to be fetishizing data and couching or, cloaking human performance programs under the guise of clinical medicine? Because what we're doing now is not clinical medicine, right? It's human performance.
I came across the biomarkers thing with Havana also, that the way it was described to me was that when you get let's use a term like a concussion,
Right.
that there are certain fluids that secrete from your brain into your body that normally would not.
Right.
And you can detect those if you take a blood sample within the first, 4 hours or whatever after the injury.
I told you that, I think.
You did you?
Yeah, because in the Havana syndrome stuff, they were measuring the right biomarkers, but they were measuring it at the wrong time. So they would measure it like, there's certain biomarkers from these injuries that disappear after 72 hours. And then they would take the people affected, or they thought were affected by Havana syndrome, measure the same biomarkers, 7 weeks out and say, it's not there, you're good.
Yeah, that was a huge issue that some of them they did get to like the day of, but then there were others who were tested like a year and a half afterwards.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And the biomarker's probably only there for a matter of hours.
There's different ones, right? So some of them are there immediately and then they disappear. And then some of them that are reparative, that are, excreted or present post-injury are there. But the easiest way I can put it, it feels to me, it's like scientific gaslighting, right? Yeah, we measured those. Those people are
Right.
fine. There's none there.
Yeah.
But when you dig down and you look at when they measured it or how they measured it, of course it's not going to be there.
Right.
And I don't have all the words for the subterfuge that seems to be appearing.
Yeah, that they're measuring something and saying the results or the conclusions or something completely unrelated.
Yeah, like the DoD still uses the MACE to assess TBI. 2010, I was quoted in media saying this is a garbage test. Statistically, it doesn't capture what it's supposed to capture. It's easy to game. It's easy to memorize. So then they made the MACE 2. You can't win for losing, right? And to be fair and to be kind to the warfighter brain health initiative, they have to fight for resources, right? They have to fight, or this funding has to be allocated to treat this. And it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to do all these things, but you have to have the appropriations behind it to do it. And, you know, from my last conversation with somebody working, you know, on the inside, I think that Warfighter Brain has 4 full-time employees.
Okay.
Okay, they might be contracting out everything else. I can't run a hospital with 4 employees. Like, I can't run anything with 4 employees. But you're proposing that you're going to treat hundreds of thousands of people with a brain injury program, and your lead on it is a pediatrician? Like, what are we doing here, right? We're the experts. And I think a lot of them have left. You know, there's a lot of people who will not do research with the Department of Defense anymore. I can't. I mean, because even, you know, the first 2 studies that I tried to do with the military under command supervision, they told me flat out, what are you going to do with unflattering results? Obviously, I'm going to publish them. Nope, no, you're not. You know, they yank that approval.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, there needs to be a lot of ethical oversight.
So, I mean, I appreciate you walking us through this very, like, kind of convoluted story in the sense, you know, like 1 step forward, 2 steps back with this issue that you guys have fought for really hard and made progress, but it's a work in progress, right?
Very.
Yeah.
Very. And we need help.
Is there anything else you want to tell people about that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah. I just need a minute. What questions do you have?
I know I'm running out of questions. I feel like we've kind of like walked through the
You're
topic.
a terrible journalist,
or
Jack.
updated the topic since the last time we discussed it.
Okay, I will say this. There are amazing people working on this worldwide. And like, you know, and this is what I do need to say, is that everybody working on this is very well intentioned. You know, people have committed their entire careers to this inside and outside of the Department of Defense. And I've met them, and I like these people, and they're good people. I think what the main issue is there's a bureaucratic bottleneck, right? There are a few people at the top who are very, very committed to making sure that we don't get accurate diagnoses and counts on this, because counts and diagnoses create claims, right? Not only in the military, they would have to treat it with active duty soldiers, but they would also have to, that the VA would also have a burden of that as well. But my argument to that is that we already have that burden. We're just calling it a bunch of other crap.
Yeah.
You know, like, we're already paying for it. We're just not calling it what it is, right? And another thing too, and I asked this question of one of the DoD leads in a recent symposium. The DoD is hyper-focused on cognitive processing speeds. It's like, how fast can you do things? How fast do you read? How fast do you get information together? And again, like, I don't want to attribute malice where idiocy will explain everything, right? So I'm not trying to infer that anybody's being malicious. But even in the instrument research that I did, the diagnostics that data that just came out, cognition and cognitive processing is one slice of that pie. But it has a lot of utility in weeding people out to be med boarded. Mm-hmm. And so my question to a DoD lead at the latest symposium was, what kind of ethical analyses have you done to ensure that you're not just going to turf people whose cognitive processing might be low, and mine is low before a cup of coffee, right? But I mean, I understand that brain injuries do it too, but it could be the wrong time of day. It could be a bad day. You know, they could be a poor tester. They could be not be paying attention, right? It could be a clinician error. So we're going to evaluate people for brain health based on one aspect of brain health, which is cognitive processing. And then if they screw it up or they score too low, what are we doing with them?
Right.
And my point to the DoD lead was, this is how you push attrition of our most seasoned and experienced operators. Like, they're not slow, okay? You can't kick them out because they're slower. Like, we all get a little slower as we age. But this is just one piece of the puzzle. And also, if you have appropriate rehabilitation and you have appropriate medications and you stop trying to treat this like PTSD, people will get better. And the thing about brain injuries is that they morph over time, right? So you need different kinds of treatments over time. And you also have to treat the systemic stuff like the gut and the musculoskeletal. And tell me how all of you are hyper fit and y'all have sleep apnea, right? I mean, guys that look like you that I've known for years who are super fit and winning judo tournaments have to go home and put on this sexy snorkel.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense, right? So there's a lot of different aspects of these blast exposure injuries that have not been duly investigated. And this is actually what I would like to say to everybody, is that when I sent this program out that the DoD is proposing, and I sent it to, experts and people that I trust to take a look at it and give me a good read on it, one of the military clinicians came back with, the warfighter brain health program looks like we are going to prescribe CrossFit for Alzheimer's. Okay? But they're right, and I don't want to sanitize that, because when you look at neurologically or anatomically what's happening after these blast exposures, it looks like an advanced dementia, okay? So we're treating these guys like they're assholes who have PTSD, who just suddenly couldn't handle, the immense responsibility and, the millions of dollars of training that they have, they just fell apart. No. Let's look at this for what it might be. If we're seeing this kind of damage to your neurological structures and we're seeing this kind of degeneration within your brain tissue itself, let's call it what it is. That's neurodegeneration.
Yeah.
Alzheimer's, Lewy body dementia, regular dementia, they all share very classic characteristics. And I think part of the issue is that guys look like you, they're walking around healthy, they're killing it at the gym, they're deploying on time regularly.
And that's the thing.
Okay.
I mean, there's this attitude that, like, if the dude shows up for work, he's good to go. And some of them are, and some of them are not, and they need some treatment.
When I look back now at Mike's symptoms leading up to his death,
He showed up for work, right?
he showed up for work.
Yeah.
He didn't know who his coworkers were anymore, but he showed up. But if Mike had been in his 70s and his
People would have
daughter
viewed it
had brought him
differently.
in and said, hey,
Yeah.
my dad is getting paranoid and he's unscrewing the light bulbs, we would have assessed him for dementia.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not saying all of you guys are getting dementia, but I'm saying looks kind of similar. It looks something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's what's happening to your brains, then we need to catch it really, really early. But also, if you do have these kind of injuries and issues and you're an incredibly healthy population, and I don't want to sound like I'm going to use and abuse it, if we have an incredibly healthy, exposed population with some kind of advanced neurodegeneration that's occurring because of these injuries, think of the kind of research that could come out of that can help the millions of civilians with advanced dementia and early onset Alzheimer's, right? Because not only do you guys have blast exposures, you have toxic exposures, you have uranium exposures, you have diesel exposures. And so I think there's so much good that could come out of this if we could get a weaponized bureaucracy out of the way.
Well, so while we are working on getting rid of the weaponized bureaucracy, I'd like to ask you if you have any advice to share with any of the team sergeants, the squad leaders out there. Like, what can they do on their level, whether there's something tactically that could be done or just awareness of a certain program that either on the military or civilian side that you can refer your soldiers to? Like, what would you tell those, like, small unit tactical leaders?
Okay, so for one, statistically, female spouses are as accurate as clinicians. No. I read up. I'm serious. Like when people say, "Oh, I did the research." No, you read research. Okay, I'm telling you.
I did my own research and found out that the spouse is always right about her husband.
Maybe not, but we're incredibly good historians. So listen to them, okay? Because we know the subtleties, and we see the shit that never makes it into the team room.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And also to these senior NCOs and officers who know their guys, you know these guys. You know, and I understand lots of marriages fall apart in special operations. It's kind of par for the course, but it's also not. It's a huge flag So if you know, you're a guy, like, maybe he and his wife had, whatever, some friction here and there, but now things are going sideways, that's a flag, right? Any kind of aberrant behavior that just ain't right. I mean, you're going to know it in your gut. And when you take them to, so I'm not as concerned with special operations medicine.
You were the one that pointed out to me, that got me thinking about things differently, that the soldier isn't fucked up because he got divorced. They got divorced because he was fucked up beforehand. I mean, there's a sort of different way of looking at why the relationships fail.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, the stripper at Bragg that nobody should have married. But aside from that,
No.
What?
Who does that?
Nobody. But aside from that, if the marriage is falling apart, that's usually the first big flag. Because guys will let that go before they ever let the career go.
Yeah, that's true.
No, but it's true. I mean, in my own research, I found that too, is that they'll get divorced 4 times before they're like, oh, maybe this job is killing me. Maybe this job is killing all of my relationships. Or maybe I just, anyway, I digress. So yes, listen to the spouses, okay? And I'm not so worried about special operations medicine because they've generally been at the tip of the spear clinically. And SOCOM does have a good humanitarian kind of commander, right? Brian Fenton. So I know that they're going to do the right thing. I do truly believe that. But if you are a team sergeant, go with your guys. If you have a guy getting evaluated for whatever bullshit is bringing him in, or behaviors, or if he's screwing up, go with them to the doc. Do not let that clinician gaslight them. Do not let that clinician stamp them with PTSD. Make sure that they get... Now, not every center is going to have a Tesla 7 MRI.
Yeah.
But there's a couple different ways that you can scan patients. It's almost like Swiss cheese, right? You get one piece that's got big holes in it. You can kind of stack the scans of MRIs so that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it covers everything that a big expensive machine would do, right? So make sure that they get the lab panels, the MRIs, and everything else that they could possibly need, and do not put them on psychotropic medications until they've been cleared of a blast exposure brain injury. Because Mike was on medications for paranoia or whatever, seriously screwed him up. I heard that, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 50 times. I had all these symptoms, I went to my doc, they gave me a bunch of medications, and then the guy kills himself.
Made things way worse.
Well, yeah, you can't treat organic brain injuries like you would treat PTSD. You can't do it. I mean, the neural systems are completely...
Yeah, it's a misdiagnosis.
Very much.
Yeah.
And so, if this, syndromes that we're seeing, that we've been able to kind of show proof of concept utility of measuring, and then there is a syndrome that we've named associated with it that we've called CROWNs, which is combat-related overpressure, wave neurotrauma, and sequela. So sequela just means kind of everything else. We've got the neurotrauma, we know that happens. What's the sequence that happens after with that, right? And so we have now at least proof of concept of a syndrome called CROWNs that is related to blast overpressure, where I would like to thank the people who coined operator syndrome initially, and I'm not trying to take anything from them, but that's not the whole picture, right? Those are kind of emergent symptoms that we saw in cohorts of special operators, but we couldn't really connect that to their exposures, right? And they were calling it allostatic load. Okay, that's different branch of clinical science. You can call it what you want to. In research science, we're going to investigate it more rigorously. And so the syndrome that has come out of what the 3 of us have been doing for the last couple of years that we've termed CROWNs. For one, CROWNs, it's your head, right? Makes sense because this goes through your head. But also it encapsulates, a pretty wide spectrum of symptoms that a lot of special operators have. I mean, I'm sure you could think of your 4 or 5 best friends in special operations, and guaranteed you guys all have, if you have 10 symptoms, most of you have 5 or 6 the same, right?
Yeah, I mean, I told a friend of mine recently, like, we kind of reconnected after like 15 years. I was like, dude, don't wait another 15 years because those burn pits are going to get one of us.
I was at the Trade Center in 2001, and I'm the only one from my team who has not popped hot for
Really?
some kind of weird cancer. I was there for a month.
From all the inhaling the, like, aluminum dust and all that other stuff.
I was also one of the only people on my team who wore a respirator.
Well, yeah.
But I mean, but it's true. Like,
We had a guy on this show, Jason, who works for a company that they're trying to get the military to start use respirators because of the, shooting guns and weapons and other carcinogens, burn pits. So that's another work in progress.
not only that, where you all deployed to, your AOs, the farm animals, okay? I'm not talking about eating them, but just like the way that they farm in some areas that you were deployed to, the way that they farm and the particular in the air, you guys pop hot with weird bacterial infections coming back from deployment. I mean, there's so many different exposures, and that's the not sexy stuff, right? That's the preventive medicine. That's, getting test tubes full of like goat shit and determining when it dries and it's in the air, what are you guys going to be inhaling, right? That's all stuff that requires money, and it's not sexy and it's not cool, but that is the basis of determining good occupational health, right?
I remember having dinner. I just at the chow hall happened to sit with a guy who was an Army veterinarian. And I was talking.
Was his name Lee?
I cannot remember.
Okay.
This is back in like 2004 or 5.
Okay.
That winter. And I had this conversation with him sort of about this topic.
Yeah.
And he's talking about, the agriculture and the bacterias that are present and that we don't have back home. And so you guys are being exposed to this bacteria that you don't have immunities to, et cetera, et cetera. And I asked him, like, what do you think is going to be like the long-term exposure or like the long-term result for soldiers being exposed to these things? And he was like, we'll probably never know.
Okay.
Yeah. I know that's not very helpful.
I don't know. As a scientist, I hate to hear that. We'll probably never know.
Yeah, but I
Oh,
mean,
yes, we will.
there's, but I mean, if you don't make
No,
a
he's right.
concerted
Yeah,
effort to
exactly.
try to understand it, we won't. Like
Exactly.
Gulf War syndrome or something like that.
But that also took veterans and their spouses and clinicians and scientists, the Grandpa Simpson yelling at the cloud. Eventually, you get some traction. But, it's certainly not happening from inside the house, right? It's far more palatable, I think, politically and bureaucratically to just keep on keeping on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wish that it was just my opinion. I wish that it wasn't this way. But unfortunately, I have years and years of congressional research and DODIG and GAO looking at these programs. And the interesting part, like the PTSD program for the Department of Defense, it's not perfect, right? Like there's definitely areas to improve, but they're not getting dinged every 18 months on wasting $80 million a year. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they're not getting congressional inquiries from armed services saying, what the hell are you doing with the $3 billion that we've given you over the last couple of years? Like some of that money, okay, you ready? A couple $1 million, I think it was 3.4 million, was spent on reading the Odyssey and the Iliad, I think.
What?
Yeah. Uh-huh. So TBI care or mental health care, somebody on high decided that it would be a good idea and improve morale and reduce suicide or mental health issues by reading Greek classics to soldiers.
That was definitely an 04 looking to get some promotion points that came up with that brilliant idea.
You know what, 04's, I don't know. That seems like a war college. I'm sorry, that's such a no.
Well, these things aren't mutually exclusive.
Fair enough. Another one, which was really great, I remember when this came out, they did the Sesame Street thing about combat injuries for military kids. That was amazing. I remember because Gwen was little when that came out. I didn't know at the time that was money that was allocated for mental health and brain injury programs. Let's do a Sesame Street skit for military children about the injuries. We're not going to treat the injuries, but we are definitely going to spend a couple $1 million to
Yeah, it's a strange approach. We're going to spread awareness. But
yeah, and I mean, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope I'm misquoting this, but I think over the last 4 years, one of the reports said that there was $400 million allocated for research, okay? So I'm a career academic scientist, I'm a tenured professor. I'm always looking for money, right? Always looking for research money to pay my staff. I don't get any money out of it, but, it pays for the research to be done. And $400 million, I think within 4 or 5 years, there were 13 studies.
that's, yeah, okay.
They could have funded 400 $1 million research studies with that. Do you know how much a professor can do, or an academic scientist could do with $1 million? Like, look at what we've done with nothing, right? The DoD won't fund the kind of research that I'm doing or that other people are doing where we're getting unflattering results, right? In fact, from what I heard, not from the principal investigator, because he's way too professional to ever say this, but through the grapevine, I heard that the ReBLAST study at Harvard with the 30 Navy SEALs that found all of that specific brain damage, that was a pilot. That was a pilot study of 30 operators. And they were promised second phase, third phase, right? We're going to bring in more guys. We're going to scan more guys. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Guess what happened after they had initial unflattering results that showed blast exposure is linked to brain damage?
Squashed it.
You think? So, I mean, not even from the guy's perspective, right? I'm not even touching on that yet. Just from a scientist's perspective, our job is to tell the truth. We spend years studying methods so that the results that we have are unassailable and they're the truth. And people can replicate them and they can, tear them apart.
This sort of like perversion of the medical authority, I think, is what leads some, at least partially responsible for people out there to support someone like RFK Jr. that has all kinds of insane anti-scientific ideas. But we have to also acknowledge, as insane as that is, that there is this real erosion of scientific authority, medical authority in this country for some legitimate reasons. We have psychologists who participated in enhanced interrogation and torture down in Guantanamo. I'm not aware of any of them being disciplined for that.
Well, and the people who advised enhanced interrogation at that time are part of the team. From what I remember, I could be wrong. They are part of the team that developed the Master of Resilience training for the United States military.
Wow.
Yeah. Uh-huh. From waterboarding to think happy thoughts. Right?
Thanks, bro.
Thanks, bud.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Holy
regressing,
shit.
a decade of research. But yeah, I do agree with you that there's some erosion. But I think that if you are able to speak to people at their level and, okay, so for instance, like my research with special operators was based, at the time that I did those studies, that was based on 10 years of relationship building, just as a clinician and a scientist. They knew me as like an annoying doctoral student asking all these questions, and then they knew me as a researcher, and then they knew me as a person. And so they would talk to me, right? So I didn't really face that in my own research. I do think that there's a general distrust of science. I would completely understand anybody in the military not trusting clinical science, right? Or trusting their doc. And I've worked among them, and I've been one. I was a DoD civilian clinician, but I would understand the mistrust because
The military keeps lying about shit.
you said it, right? You go in with legitimate complaints. Your life is falling apart. You can't trust your own brain, and somebody looks at you and kind of is like, "Well, and okay." That needs somebody. You go to your physician or you go to your doc for that needs to be jumped on.
Yeah.
The response that these guys should be getting is, oh my God, okay, tomorrow you're going for an MRI. Go to the lab right now. We're going to put you on this medication. We're going to get you this neuro rehab. Like, and that's part of the issue, is that we need a standard protocol for somebody coming and saying, hey, I have these blast exposures, on it, right? If somebody's having a heart attack, they're going to get an EKG within 10 minutes. I'm going to draw troponin. I'm going to, give them oxygen and nitrates and aspirin and morphine and all this shit coming in. I'm not going to stand over them and be like, how many hamburgers have you eaten in the last year, right? And I'm not going to say, well, you know what? I know you have these symptoms and I know they're really awful and you want to kill yourself, but we've got like 100,000 other people that we're getting their troponin levels from, and we're not going to treat you until we know everybody else's level. That's not clinical medicine. That's kicking the can.
Yeah.
Okay? So, yeah, we can measure blast gauge data and we can measure overpressure levels, but we have to be treating people in a gold standard way at the same time. And I do remember the days when military medicine was like the pinnacle, right? That's where all of my trauma training, my advanced trauma training, came from Vietnam and all of that. Military medicine, it still is. Like, it's absolutely honorable and it's an amazing profession. But I think that the way the military has handled brain injuries has really diminished our standing as defense clinicians. It used to be where I could say, oh, I'm a defense health scientist, or I study military trauma, or I study combat trauma. And that was my, entree, right? People trusted that. And now there's been so many scandals and so much poor care that the good clinicians, it's not the clinicians, really. It's the system, right? If you have a poor system, people are going to get poor care.
Yeah.
So I agree with you.
Before we get going, any final thoughts? Anything I didn't ask that you'd really like to get out there for folks?
I really want to sound like I have all that in my brain. It's been a wild 2 years, or a year and a half of doing this. We just started at the end of 2023. Probably have a million things to tell you after we're done. But enough's enough. We know the symptoms. We can't be the only people advocating. There has to be a groundswell.
Yeah. Call your congressman.
Yeah, and this doesn't get better with time, right? Even if these guys have blast exposures and there's no symptoms now, just wait.
Yeah. There's social repercussions down the line.
Yeah, get it into your records now. Get all of your toxic exposures into your records now while you're active duty. And demand it. Clinicians are not your chain of command. And they should not be communicating with your chain of command about your medical issues. Unless there's some kind of agreement going on here. But as a soldier, you can go in and say, this is unacceptable levels of care. Let me speak to your chief physician. Let me speak to the chief medical officer. Because I'm telling you, I've had X amount of blast exposures, or I'm a sniper, and I'm having all of these weird symptoms, and you're writing me off. Sit in that office until the MPs remove you. Honestly, because that's the only way that we're going to have some kind of accountability, because it's going to have to start at the grassroots. And I've been at the grassroots, and now I'm walking around Capitol Hill, but I'm still walking around with that grassroots knowledge. I've still sat in the rooms with families crying and guys losing their minds because they don't understand what has happened to their brains. So yes, you have to start advocating for yourself at the ground level. And yes, you have to call your congresspeople. And that's the, remember, I'm sure you've heard it in the military, when you were in the military, oh, it's a congressional. Oh, they called her a congressperson. So that's what they're there for, right? That is what they're supposed to be doing. So raise some hell,
Congressional
I would say.
inquiries. Well, thank you for coming on
Thanks
here
for having me again.
and bringing us up to date and sharing
for
some
the
of this. It's you brought the whiskey, not?
Oh, that's right. I'm drinking the whiskey I brought.
Is it good?
Yeah, you want to try some?
Yes.
Okay.
If our producer will let me, after last night's debacle.
Did you tie one on?
Yeah. We had to.
Go ahead, Jack. You're an adult.
we had MARSOC guy here last night, and me and him stayed
It's
here
good.
till like 2 a.m. just bullshitting and drinking bourbon.
Sounds like a good night.
Oh yeah, that's smooth.
It's nice, right?
Yeah.
What is it called? Natter Jack. Oh, Natter Jack. That's a new nickname for you. Natter Jack Irish whiskey. All right.
Cool.
Got a good one.
Yeah, so again, I mean, thanks for sharing this information with
Yeah.
everyone. I hope these videos kind of make the rounds a little bit, you know, in the special ops or other military communities. And yeah, call your congressman.
Oh, and also, what's today? April 24th?
Yes.
Ryan Larkin died 8 years ago yesterday.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it sucks. But from that, well, I don't know if there's really anything from that that can, like, even make his death even a tiny bit palatable. But I just wanted to remember the reason that we're here. Because Ryan died, and then 2 years later, Mike died. And I started studying this because Ryan died. And I don't know, making lemonade out of lemons.
Well, yeah, one last thing, I'll just direct people towards that Yahoo News piece that
About
I
Mike?
wrote years ago.
Put it in the description.
Oh, okay. So yeah, there'll be a link down in the description. Thanks, Steve. For folks that want to go out there and read that, it's not a easy story to read. It wasn't an easy story to write, but it's important and is the lead into this entire topic that we've been talking about.
You worked on that for what, 8 months?
That was a while. Something was
Yeah.
it that long? Maybe it was a while though.
Yeah, because it was the summer and it came out in February of 22.
Yeah.
So you did a really huge deep dive on that.
And then I don't know if you read the Havana syndrome thing I wrote with Sean Naylor.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, you did? Okay. That took like 2 years to like put all that together. That was a heavy one. But
Well, like I said, I mean, these are heavy subjects,
Yeah.
right? You write about heavy stuff. I research heavy stuff. It's, I mean, you know, it's hard. But it's harder to live through it. So the work continues.
and I'm sure we'll have you back again in another few years to tell us about what the next update is on this medical journey.
How many of the other more right people did I piss off? Just
I don't think so.
No, I mean, but that's what science is supposed to do. I mean, research and science is supposed to piss off all the right people, right? It's supposed to be grating and annoying and upturn the apple cart. That's what new evidence does. We have better evidence now, so let's have better care, right?
Yeah, I people are too obsessed with wanting to be well liked nowadays. I mean, sometimes your job is to tell people shit they don't want to hear.
Seems to be my lot in life,
And
yeah.
when you do that, they're not going to like that boot in their ass. Too bad.
No, they're not, but you know what? Let them go kneel at Mike's gravestone.
Yeah.
Go ahead, go find his gravestone in section 60. Go ahead, kneel at it, sit down in front of it, tell me I'm wrong. Right?
Yeah.
I may not be right 100%, but I'm on the right track, and so are my colleagues. We know what we're doing, and we know where this needs to go. And people are listening, so that's a good thing.
Good. Making some progress.
Well, you help, and this podcast helps too.
Good. Oh, I'm glad. So we will see all you guys out there next time. Thank you, Kate, for joining us
Thanks
in
for having
studio. And we'll see you guys next time.
Hey guys, it's Jack. I just want to talk to you for a moment about how you can support the show if you've been watching it, enjoying it, but you'd like to get a little bit more involved and help us continue to do this. You can check out our Patreon. It is patreon.com/theteamhouse. And for $5 a month, you can get access to all of these episodes of The Team House ad-free. The same goes with our affiliated podcast, Eyes On, with Andy Milburn, Jason Lyons, Mick Mulroy. That one, you will also get all of those episodes ad-free. And you support the channel and the show, and we really appreciate it. The Patreon members are literally what has helped this company, this small business survive, especially during our early years. And you are what continues to help this thing going, even as we navigate the turbulent world of YouTube advertising. So we really appreciate all of you guys. There's going to be a link down in the description to that Patreon page. And there is also going to be a link to our new merch shop. So if you guys want to go and get some Team House merchandise, we got stickers and we also have patches. And I should mention, if you sign up for Patreon at $10 a month, we will mail you this patch as well. So we really appreciate that. But they're also for sale on the merch shop. And additionally, they got t-shirts up there, water bottles, a tote bag, coffee mugs, all that good stuff. So please go and check them out and support the show. We really appreciate it, guys. Thank you.